kinds of ethical skills? Don't they already own those admirable moral qualities before we elect them?
Are we paying or are we rewarding them now?
Well,
isn't that the philosophy that we're rewarding them for having them?
Well, I think not only are we rewarding, but we're attempting to encourage them to nurture those. In other words, by raising the salary, we would hope that they would continue to become more morally responsible.
I know this sounds cynical and banal, and certainly the economists talking, but no, virtue certainly has a price, and virtue must have a reward. And I think, again, that's as naive as John's citizen legislator. I don't think that exists now, and I think that's a myth that existed a long time ago, is that, you know, you can have this notion of citizen legislator. The citizen legislator is dead. If you look at states that operate... But if you look at states, again, there's been a lot of studies done in this in political science and public choice literature that indicate states that have fairly low remuneration for their state legislators are characterized by legislators who go in for a few years at most, stay, make some contacts, and go on the outside. That if you look at the occupations, for an example, that legislators come from in low-paid states compared to high-paid states, there's a systematic difference. In the low-paid states, they're drawn from very different occupations than in the high-paid states. Now, I don't know whether that means low-paid states have better or worse government than high-paid states for legislators, but there are differences. People do respond to economic incentives, and that's going to be true in the public sector as well as the private sector.
But economic incentives have not been the prime motivator in most occupations. The concept of what is believed to be the best kind of public servant, the best kind of candle maker, the best kind of car dealership, ethics tends to be the primary motivator in most occupations.
Well, then I think we have to ask ourselves a hard question, and I think that's one that there's no clear answer, and I think this panel or anyone else can come up with the answer. Do we want fairly low-paid public servants who will have an incentive to go in for a few years, make some contacts, and then work on the outside doing consulting in ways that some of us would view as being unethical at times? Or do we want to have public servants that are in for long periods of time and develop some expertise? That can have problems too, I'm not saying that. But it's clear that those are the kinds of trade-offs that have to be raised in the public discussion. And what we get now is just a fray about, oh, that's a lot of money, $50,000 increase.
We raised the point a couple weeks ago on this program about the gap between upper income people and lower income people and the trend in that direction. I'd like to propose that perhaps in this issue we see the public responding to the fact that we don't really like the notion through this pay increase, through congressmen being allowed, if they should leave office, to take surplus campaign contributions with them as taxable income, to make large sums of money equivalent to 30 or 40% of their income in honorarium and everything like that. We're really responding to another gap, and that is the gap between the lifestyles of the leadership, the political leadership of this country, and the lifestyle of the electorate. And I think that's an issue to this extent as well. And it's George Bush's unfortunate situation, perhaps, and also this new Congress's unfortunate situation. This is coming right at the beginning, because it's really going to color the way I think people look at the performance of their legislators and of the president of the executive branch and of the courts over the next 4 years, because it's become such an inflammatory issue at this particular time.
I also think that we have to focus upon the fact that this pay increase involved not only politicians, but also federal judges and also skilled people in the bureaucracy. People, for example, at the National Institutes of Health are not going to get their raise. So it is an issue that is complex. I think the major problem I have with the whole controversy is how they handle it. In other words, it was not dealt with in a procedural, upfront kind of manner. They were going to backdoor it. And I think if they'd come to the people, the American people, with a more honest approach, I believe that the American people would have been more sympathetic.
I also think, back to Cecil's comment, that there are more than two choices that we need to make insofar as what do we want in the future from representation. Whether we want someone in to make a quick show and then leave, or we want to be able to open the pocketbooks to encourage a longer tenure in office to get better quality service. I think that we need to ask some other questions. Don't we need to perhaps inject more integrity in public service in general? We've been fighting this battle with the teaching profession. Those salaries have also also been characteristically low. Therefore, we've been attracting some undesirables into the profession. Those undesirables even don't stay long. They make a quick show and they move on to something else which is more lucrative. We are currently, as a nation, I think, moving toward injecting a little more dignity into that profession, and I think perhaps that strategy would not be a bad one here as well. Perhaps money and power ought to be downplayed as motivators to go into public service. There's my naivete again, Cecil, but maybe we should start encouraging a caring after our nation, a caring after individuals, and then gaps like these will be much more easy to bridge, and these raises will be more understandable and palatable to the American public as well, if they know that their public servants are coming into that particular job with their best interests in mind, truly, not just prima facie.
But again, I mean, there's a simultaneity problem there. Look at what happened to Bush's appointment to HHS.
That's right. And defense.
The question was, can I keep my pension fund that I've got from Morehouse College? And the answer was, no, you can't, and it's silly that you ask.
Or actually go on a paid sabbatical.
On a paid sabbatical, that's right. I mean, the obvious problem was that, what is it cabinet members earn as a top salary?
Almost 100.
About 100. And it's still in Washington, D.C., if you're dealing with an agency like HHS that's got a budget of over $200-300 billion, someone in the corporate world is going to get miles more than $100,000. And that's obviously a constraint. I mean, people don't like the idea of having to pay people at the top a lot, but the bottom line is you do have to pay people top of the lot if you want to attract reasonable talent.
The three issues that I named: fairness, honesty, productivity. Productivity is not necessarily effort. Oftentimes we can work very, very hard and be like Charlie Brown, the cartoon character. You know, Charlie Brown, he's very serious about issues, but he's oftentimes serious about the wrong things. So perhaps, as Angie implies, perhaps leadership should come about to focus upon what is the purpose of Congress, what is the purpose of organizations. And so it seems that leaders have not used what we called several weeks ago the bully pulpit. So there needs to be leadership in terms of ethics, in terms of these kinds of issues.
Realistically, will Congress do something to defuse this, to avoid this kind of...
in the future?
Yeah. I mean, once this is behind us, can Congress act? Will Congress act to, I don't know, whether they set up an indexing or are we going to go through this every 5 or 6 years when they decide, maybe when every president leaves and says, okay, I can...
My parting shot.
Yeah,
I think
my gift.
We ought to bring this back to the process again on this. And I don't know when this process got started, maybe it's a generation old on this, of having this external board, if you will, of very well-paid corporate types and people from the law profession or whatever else, who are well compensated themselves, making these recommendations about people in Congress. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the nature of the future, but Congress actually had this more or less dropped in their lap, if you want to look at it in one political sense, and that is you had a president, you had a group of external conferees saying, this is what you deserve, and now Congress has to deal with it. And Speaker Wright obviously has been the person that's been the most under pressure on this, but actually this was dropped in his lap more or less by the former president and by the current president, who said, yes, he supported this. And it was either this or nothing. And seeing as how that's what it was, there was no in between, that's where you go. So I would think Congress, out of its own self-interest, again, Cecil, I would think it would want to come up with a procedure of some sort of a cost of living increase. That's being suggested by people like Senator Larry Pressler in the Senate, that the public would respond to that. The public would see the essential fairness of cost of living increases and not respond negatively.
I can't be completely critical of Congress people today because our local Indiana group has been very much against this raise. And Phil Sharp, in particular, has been campaigning against this raise for some time because, the issue is individual Congress people. We're generally pleased with our individual congressperson, but we're against Congress.
But I would maintain that that's why Speaker Wright, to be critical of Speaker Wright now, thought that indeed they could get away with this. That people do say, Congress is awful, but my individual congressman, in most cases, is a reasonably effective man or woman, and they prove it voters prove it by sending that person back.
Is there any delegation against it?
Well, that if there was a secret vote on the pay raise, the lopsided nature of the vote would be exactly reversed.
What a cynical ending to this program, but we're out of time. Thanks, John Rouse, Bruce Gilhood, Angie Cooksey, and Cecil Bohannon for being with us. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for joining us.